So today we are going to discuss, so our agenda is we are going to discuss identity as a parameter, what is the business to architectural bridge, finally securing the hybrid cloud scale and enterprise root of trust. Now, along with the architectural validation. Now, when we are talking about identity as the parameter, so when we talk about in traditional organizations, trusted users. So now when we talk about the trusted users, okay, now it's not like trusted users when we are saying the trusted users only has to be the full-time employees who are working within the organization, right? We have like contractors, we have consultants, we have third-party employees. So traditional organizations, they basically trust the users and systems once they are inside the corporate network. Okay, now people who are connecting to the network, they can either come to office, they may be connected to the local area network, they may be connected to the office wi-fi, they may be connected via vpn. So your office LAN, your VPN, your your Wi-Fi, your firewall, they basically acted as the main security boundary, right? So now, but in the modern, today in the modern organizations, most of the organizations, they work on a zero trust model. So trust, but validate, verify. So when we talk about from a zero trust model, trust is no longer based, okay, trust is no longer based on where a user is connected from. Instead, the access decisions are basically based on the identity, it is based on the context, and it is based on the continuous verification. So now when we are talking about continuous verification, so what identity replaces the network? What it means is, instead of asking, is this user is from inside the corporate network, right? We basically, in a zero trust model, we basically ask, who is this user? Is he or she a normal user, or is the person is a privileged user? The device from which they are connecting, is this a device trusted? Okay, and is the access request which is coming, is it normal? Okay, should this identity access the application right now? So this is what a zero trust model is all about. Now, one live example, an industry use case which I can give you is like, in every organization we have a list of service accounts, right, which are being monitored. Now service accounts are something which is being used for different purposes, right? So like, if I'm talking about from a SQL server perspective, because I myself have been working as a DBA for quite a long time. In database, if I talk about from a SQL server perspective, we have a SQL, we have a SQL mon underscore dot svc service account. So in every organization, we basically monitor the activity which is happening in the service account, right? So one of the live use case I can give you is where, recently, like, I was working with a customer who basically wanted to raise a policy violation using ServiceNow, that if someone is connecting to the sensitive databases and they are not using the company provided device, they are using like their personal devices like their iPads, or they are using their laptops, and they are using, instead of using their LDAP account, they are using service account to connect to the database and run a query, then this is should be captured as a violation, and it should be, an incident should be raised on ServiceNow, and it should be escalated to all the higher authorities, that the sensitive database is being accessed by this person using the service account, right? So this is where the zero trust model comes in. So we have developed policies, or we have developed a set of rules where we have mentioned, like, if the databases are sensitive, if the connection is coming from the device which is not whitelisted. Means say someone is trying to use their personal device and they are trying to connect using service account to run a query in the database. So those kind of activities should be captured, right? So in the zero trust, now when we talk about from the zero trust perspective, even though we have four options: who is this user, is the device is trusted, is the access request is normal, should this identity access this application right now, there are a lot of other factors which we can incorporate when we talk about from a zero trust perspective. Like live example, what is the day and time an end user is connecting to the database? Are they trying to connecting over the weekdays? Are they trying to connect over the weekends? Right? From which location they are trying to connect? Right? So all these factors will be taken into consideration before a decision is made that whether the access should be allowed or it should be denied. So if we talk about from a traditional perspective, so in the traditional model, we basically trust based on the network location, but in the zero trust, we basically trust based on the verified identity. In the traditional model, we basically use VPNs, but here on the zero trust, the access is granted per application slash session. So in some organizations, you must have seen, like even though you are connected to the VP, you are connected to the organization via VPN, there are certain servers there where there are certain sessions which as a user, because you are working from home, you are not allowed to connect. Or even if you are allowed to connect, there will be a lot of kind of you can say safeguards which will be implemented on this application or session, like your clipboard sharing will not be available, the application which you are connecting you cannot copy and paste, right? You will not be able to access internet if you are trying to access the application within a VDI. So all these controls which we are talking about, they are all actually coming or incorporating from the zero trust model. Now, when we talk about internal users are often trusted, but in the zero trust model, we basically rely on continuous authentication and authorization. So this is where we basically, if your organization is using a security information and event management, right? So in the security information and event management, what we basically do is we use the user behavioral analytics, where we continuously monitor the user behavioral activities, and if there is any outlier, we try to report on them by assigning the risk score, right? We basically, in the traditional model, we basically have a perimeter based firewall, but here in the zero trust, we basically check the identity from which device the person is trying to connect. Okay, what is the day and time from which location, and based on all these factors, a decision will be made that whether the access should be allowed or denied. Finally, in traditional model, we have a flat network list, but in the zero trust model, we can do the micro segmentation and least privilege. Now, one of the reason of doing a micro segmentation is that tomorrow, even if one part of the application is compromised, by using the micro segmentation, we are actually containing the incident within one segment. So for that purpose, whether you are talking about within your on-prem or within your cloud, we basically have your micro segmentation. Okay. Now the next is we have the business to architectural change. So now when we talk about a business to architecture, now one of the key things when we talk about from an ISSAP perspective is like how the SABSA, okay, how the SABSA and TOGAF, they basically work together. Okay, how the SABSA and TOGAF, they basically work together. So that is one of the main. Now even in the exam, okay, you will get some questions based on SABSA. So you can say like SABSA is very much confirmed in the exam. So now when we're talking about from the SABSA requirements, okay, when we're talking about from a SABSA requirements, so as you can see the TOGAF. Now what is the key difference? Okay, what is the key? So TOGAF provides the enterprise architectural structure, right? So TOGAF mainly focus on the enterprise architecture, whereas when we talk about from a SAPSA ensures that the security is business context driven rather than technology driven. So if you see the layers of TOGAF, so TOGAF has your business strategy, they basically have your architectural design, your governance, your implementation. So in this, we have your enterprise transformation is there, your business data application technology architecture is there, we have your architectural governance, migration roadmap, all these things we have. So if I talk about a step-by-step translation process, right? But when we talk about in SAPSA is more like a business-driven security requirement, where the security services are basically the security services are integrated with the risk architecture. We basically take into consideration the security governance and assurance. We make sure that the security controls are integrated within the existing IT infrastructure. So if I talk about a step-by-step translation process, right? So when we talk about a business strategy in terms of TOGAF and in terms of SAPSA, okay? So examples could be like where we are trying to expand digital banking services, right? We are trying to, so now when we are talking about the digital banking services, definitely we need to reduce the frauds. We need to meet the RBI compliance requirement. We need to maintain the DPDP Act, right? We need to improve the customer trust. We need to enable the cloud migration. So these, what you set in the business strategy, which is your enterprise transformation or business driven security requirement, that basically becomes the foundation for both the goals. Okay, whether we are talking about TOGAF or whether we are talking about from a SAPSA perspective. Okay, now when we talk about from SAPSA, okay, in SAPSA we basically start identifying the confidentiality requirements, what are the integrity requirements, availability requirements, accountability, data privacy, and resilience. So one live example I can give you, like when we talk about from a banking perspective. Now, if I am trying to create a enterprise security architecture for a bank, so what are the some key goals of a bank will be to reduce the fraud, right? So now the business goal could be to reduce the fraud. Now, when we're talking about reducing the fraud, what would be the attribute which we'll be using in SAPSA? That is your integrity and accountability. Now, when we talk about from a customer trust perspective, so we need to improve the customer trust. So for which we need to maintain the confidentiality and privacy. At the same time, we need to provide the services, right? We need to provide 24/7 services. So availability for authenticated users, availability and resilience are the main consideration. So when we talk about in an organization and you're trying to integrate, so how you can align the information security, right? How you can align the information security with the TOGAF is something where we talk about the business to architectural change. So as I was talking about, the TOGAF provides the enterprise architectural structure, whereas your SAPSA ensure the security is business context driven rather than the technology driven. Now, when we are talking about the next is when we are talking about securing hybrid cloud scale. So for ephemeral software defined environments without a physical hardware, resilience must be designed around identity automation, policy telemetry, and recovery by rebuild rather than fixed network zones or devices. So now when we are talking about resilience, right? When we are talking about resilience, so basically when we talk about in resiliency, so how you can manage if your organization, how you can, what should be the core security design principles when your organization is planning to move certain applications or certain resources like your VMs etc to the cloud. Like if your organization is trying to move their sensitive data to the cloud, so what are the core security design principles? So the design principles are So basically you need to treat everything as temporary. So when I say treat everything as temporary, so it means your virtual machines, your containers, your serverless functions, IPs, workloads, network paths, they may appear, they may disappear frequently. So security controls, they must attach to the identity workload. They must be integrated with the services. They must be integrated with the image and policy tags. So one live example I can give you for this is, in many organizations, you must have seen that when they are trying to launch any instances on the cloud, whether it's an AWS, whether it's an Azure, or whether it's a GCP, they don't use the ready to image which is available in the AWS or Azure marketplace. They use their own customized image because their change management policies or their security policy says that any image, using any image, if you are planning to deploy any instance, you need to perform the vulnerability assessment and pen testing. In many organizations, like one of the live example I can give you, in one of the banks 2 years before, on which I was part of deploying the database activity monitoring, they, even though the images for deploying the database activity monitoring appliances was published by IBM on the AWS and Azure marketplace, still they prefer to use their own customized AMI, and using that AMI they basically build the instances on the cloud. One of the reason, because they wanted to perform the vulnerability assessment and pen testing, and plus the appliances are going to process some sensitive data like your Aadhaar card and passport, because those are the sensitive data collecting from the database. So they didn't wanted to risk anything, right? So that is why we say that the core security principles is treat everything as temporary. So now when we are talking about the workload identity, service identity, image identity, they are not static hosts or physical appliances. So you need to integrate information security controls regardless of how many VMs, containers, and serverless functions your organization is having. The next is we have a use zero trust as a foundation. So do not trust the workloads because they are inside the cloud or virtual network, right? So again, as I have mentioned, so do not trust the workload just because of they are within your VPC or they are within your VNet, right? So you need to enforce strong workload identity. You need to use mutual authentication such as TLS. You need to make sure that the access is granted based on least privilege principle. You need to have a continuous authorization mechanism. We need to have a micro segmentation. So as I mentioned, one of the advantage of having a micro segmentation is, tomorrow even if there is an attack happens, it will, we can isolate the particular network so that the infections of that attack doesn't spread to other parts of the network. And plus we should use the short lived credentials. Okay, so do not, even if someone is trying to perform some activity which requires privileged user access, so do not provide them the access, provide them the temporary access which can be used to which can be used to accomplish the task, and after 30 minutes or 1 hour, those credentials which you have given, it becomes invalid. So it has a name in zero trust which we call it as a just in time access. So one of the advantage of having just in time access could be like where we can say that one of the advantage of just in time access is we don't have to give privileged users access to all users at all time. So let's take a live example that if I have a VM admin, and the VM admin takes monthly snapshots of all my tier 1 VMs. So I have two ways to accomplish the task. One is I can give the VM admin the person as a VM administrator access, who will be able to use this access to take snapshots of the VM. Okay, but there is a probability that he or she may misuse that access as well. Plus, when there's an audit and all is happening, like when there is an external or third party audit, the more people in your organization they have privileged user access, the more kind of evidence you need to provide to your auditors, and you may have to provide explanation that why so many people are having privileged user access. right? So instead of doing all that, we provide just-in-time access. So we try to break down the activity where we try to identify like how frequently this person requires privileged user access of on the VMs. So let's say the person is taking snapshot of the VMs monthly once, and that is also only for 30 minutes, right? So what I can do is, with the help of just in time access, I can implement rules where automatically on every first weekend of every month, the account will automatically get an administrative access, the VM admin access, for only 30 minutes or 1 hour, using which he can take the snapshots. After that, whatever privilege access was given to his account, it will automatically revoke. So just in time access, what we talk about, it's basically a principle which is there from the zero trust model only. Okay. Now the next is we have an enterprise root of trust. So now in the enterprise root of trust, what we have centralized cryptographic governance. It means creating one enterprise-wide authority, policy, and control framework to manage how the encryption keys, certificates, secrets, and cryptographic algorithms are going to be used across the entire global supply chain, right? So what are the core components? So in every organization, whether we are talking about your own internal employees or whether we are talking about even your global supply chain, which can include your third party vendors, we need to have crypto policies and standards where we need to define what are the algorithms which are approved. Now the algorithms which are approved, which are testable in the exam, are FIPS 140-2 and 140-3. What are the key lengths? Okay, which are, so the, because what we say is the greater the key length is, the more unique keys you can produce against the crypto system, right? What are the certificate standards? Okay, what kind of TLS version? So now as you can see that we don't use a TLS 1.1. Recommendation is to use the TLS 1.2. What kind of algorithms you are using for hashing, right? Are you using the MD5 or SHA? What are the signing methods? Okay, what are the cryptographic algorithms which are prohibited to use within an organization? So your governance, when we talk about from the cryptographic governance perspective, your organization must have a crypto policy and standard. Finally, when your organization is managing the encryption keys, so like live example of I can give you. So in the database, right? So if your database contains sensitive data, like you are processing GDPR EU specific data, you are storing credit card data, you are storing PII data, so ideally the recommendation is that the data within the database must be encrypted. So for encrypting the data within the database tables, we basically have a solution which is called as Cipher Trust, Thales Cipher Trust Manager. Okay, we also have something called as a Guardium data encryption, which is basically a component provided by IBM. Okay, now one of the advantages of using these Thales Cipher Trust Manager or IBM Guardium data encryption is they help you to encrypt the data within the database. So now when I say, so let's say we have a person called as, let's say, Abhishek, and we have a person called as Arti. Now Abhishek has, we have given the policy where to Abhishek that Abhishek can encrypt, decrypt, and create. So when Abhishek logs into the database and he runs a select star from dbo credit card table, since he has an encrypt, decrypt, and process, he will be able to view the data in clear text. But on the other hand, if the same select statement is being executed by Aarti, right, she will be able to see the data in encrypted ciphertext because she doesn't have the encrypt and decrypt privileges assigned to her account by the policy or by the rule. So now when you are encrypting the data within the database by using your Thales Cipher Trust Manager or your Guardian data encryption, So it is generating encryption keys. So that encryption keys, where are you going to store that encryption key? So you can use the centralized KMS or HSM services to control key generation, storage. You have to, when you are protecting sensitive data like credit card, PII, you need to frequently rotate the keys. You need to back up the keys. You must have a key escrow process, and once the keys is no longer needed, you need to revoke and destroy the keys as well. Now when you are, even you might be wondering that as easy as it is explained, it's not very easy as how easily I explained. In the real world, it is equally difficult to get that implemented, because when we are selecting KMS, we need to identify where exactly we are going to store this KMS, whether we are going to store this KMS within on-prem, whether we are going to store this KMS in the cloud. Okay, if we are storing the KMS on the cloud, we need to maintain connectivity between the HSM and the databases all the time. So you have to have multiple AWS direct connect. Okay, because if you're, even for 1 minute, even for let's say 5 minutes, if the HSM solution, the connectivity between the HSM and your database gets broken, then people will not be able to access the database, because the data will be encrypted, which can result in a single point of failure. So when you are deciding how you are going to store the keys, you have to also identify where exactly you are going to store the keys, how you are going to make sure that there is no connectivity outage. If there is a connectivity outage, how you are going to address that. All these are the important elements when we talk about from a cryptographic governance perspective. Finally, you need to map the you need to have a data classification alignment. So where whatever kind of controls, whether you are going to have encryption, whether you are going to have masking, whether you are going to have a tokenization, all this should be aligned according to the data classification requirement, where you map the encryption requirements based on the sensitivity of the data, what kind of data you are collecting from the customers, like IPs, contracts, payment data, health data, how you are going to export that, supplier records, operational. So based on the data classification, like what is the way the data is classified, whether it is classified as top secret, secret, private, based on that you have to select the controls. And finally, if you are processing the data, like if you are processing the data on the cloud, or let's say you have some third party supplier, right? Like let's say in your organization you have your payroll data. Now the payroll data is something which your organization is not processing. Your payroll data is being processed by a third party vendor. So in those cases, you need to also include the supplier cryptographic requirements, where you need to incorporate mandate encryption at rest. You need to make sure that the data is encrypted even in transit. Make sure the certificates are not revoked. Make sure that we have the third party vendor has a proper mechanism to store the encrypted keys. And we also need to include the breach notification clauses. So tomorrow if there is a breach happens, so how soon the supplier should notify the customer. The Okay, we need to have that breach notification clauses in the supplier contract. We need to have an indemnification clauses. We need to have the right to audit clause as well, as far as the enterprise root of trust is concerned. And finally, we need to maintain the visibility of over the certificates, API keys, tokens, SSH keys. We need to maintain the machine identities. We need to store the credentials in vaulting solutions such as ARCOS PAM, CyberArk, across the internal and supplier environments. And finally, whoever has access to the key, we need to maintain the audit trail of those access as well. So in many organizations, you must have seen that whenever we try to access any sensitive data within a database, etc., we basically always go through a CyberArk vault, where whatever activity we are doing within that vault, whatever activity we are doing on the database server, entire activity is recorded, right? So that is a live example where we are maintaining visibility. Okay, whatever activity is happening, make sure that no one can access the database directly outside of the CyberArk vault. Now, in many organizations, you must have seen that within that vault itself, we will be able to maintain the API keys, we will be able to maintain the username and password. And nowadays, many organizations, they are providing, many vendors, they are providing that integration where with the help of API, we can directly retrieve the API keys or username and password directly from the CyberArk vault, rather than rather than storing that username and password within an application, which will be stored definitely in clear text, to avoid such kind of risks from happening. And finally, when we talk about the crypto inventory, make sure that we have a proper inventory in terms of keys and certificate. What are the libraries we use? What are the TLS endpoints, signing keys, and any kind of third-party crypto dependencies. Now, the last part is your architectural validation. So when we talk about your architectural validation, it means transform the cyber security from assumption driven. So, you must have, so people who are right now today attending this webinar, you guys must have coming from a CISSP or from a CISM background, where we basically, we study that don't assume that a control is working just because of it is documented that a control is implemented. That doesn't mean that the control is effective. Go check and verify. So that's what we say, architectural validation. So transform cybersecurity from assumption driven protection to evidence based backed resilience. So go check and validate that the control which we have implemented, whether it is effectively working or not. Perform the gap analysis, conduct the threat modeling, do the simulation exercises to validate the security life cycle, which means that you are moving from assuming controls will work and instead continuously validating whether the organization can withstand real world attacks, right? So when we talk about from a threat modeling by design perspective, identify the likely attackers, attack paths, what kind of attack paths they are going to take, what are the weak points within our security control, what are the business critical assets. So do the threat modeling exercises before we move the systems on the production environment. Perform attack simulations, conduct the vulnerability assessment, pen testing, tabletop exercises, breach attack simulation to and adversary emulation to test the defenses, right? Measure the detection, okay, response recovery, containment capabilities using real test results. Now, one of the live example of this I can give you. So let's say in any organization, if we have implemented a database activity monitoring, okay, so just because we have implemented a database activity monitoring doesn't mean that and a database. Now in many, this is something which is a gap which I have identified. Many people who are working on the monitoring, specifically in the SOC team, it can be your database activity monitoring, it can be your DLP, it can be your SIM appliances. What they basically do, they implement the rules, they basically onboard the log sources, and they assume that the rules will be working. They don't conduct something called as a double blind testing, etc., to validate how effective my security tool or the rules which I have created within my security tool is working effectively. Now, one live example I can give you. So like in our organization, the customer for whom I work, they frequently there here. This is, I'm talking about a CISO. Okay. Now you guys know that CISO is a very senior role within an organization. Okay. We have seen in many organizations, CISOs, they basically do a double blind testing. So all of a sudden, when the CISO wants to validate the database activity monitoring is working or not, they will basically connect to some database within an organization, and they will run some select, update, insert, delete commands. Okay, and they will let the SOC team know that I have done some activity against the database. You find what you now you provide me a report what you could find, what activities I have done. So the CISO will not provide when he exactly did the activity. He will not provide when, what kind of against what kind of server he did the activity, on which date and time he did the activity. So this is all thing the SOC team has to identify. So this is like a double blind testing which the CISO is doing to check that whether the rules which are there in which is implemented within the database activity monitoring, that is actually working effectively or not. Okay, now another live example I can give you is, so I took a use case of a service account, right, where someone is using the service account to run the query, but are you able to correlate, are you able to identify who was the actual OS user who actually use the service account, right? So let's say I am using, so I have a service account called as an app dynamics underscore svc, but if I am not able to identify who used that app dynamics.svc to drop, recreate, or truncate a certain table within my database, even though if I have captured that activity, it's of no use. I need to identify who did that, right? So in order to identify that, I need to get the actual LDAP account or the OS user who actually did that activity. So these kind of double blind testing frequently needs to happen within an organization. Okay, so that is what your architectural based validation is all about. Finally, make sure that whatever while doing the testing, while doing the testing every time when you do the testing, it is like how to put it, definitely you are going to have some gaps. Okay, definitely you are going to have some gaps. So make sure that whatever gaps you have identified, you improve those gaps. So have a feed simulation, outcomes into architectural control playbook, develop the playbooks for the frequently incidents which you are receiving, train the people, make sure that whatever risks, threats, and vulnerabilities you have identified, make sure that you report that to the senior management. So that is what your executive risk reporting is all about. So that's pretty much for today. Now, the people who are aspiring for ISSAP, so what are the recommended materials which we have? So the first is your official ISC 2 guide for ISSAP. This is still one of the most relevant book for the people who are preparing for the ISSAP. We have your CISSP CBK 6th edition. So people who are coming for the ISSAP, it's a must that you must review the CISSP CBK 6th edition. Okay, we need to also review the CCSP for dummies, specifically the domain 1, 2, and 3. Now, one of the reason why I recommend the dummies is because in the exam you may get questions from the cloud part for CCSP as well. So these are some materials. Some additional references which you can have is, you can refer the ISC Square certification references background, references link to refer the additional documents which are required. So in this link, you basically have some additional, materials like your NIST SP 800-53, your NIST SP 800-37. What are the NIST documents, ISO documents, which from the exam perspective you must refer. Now we also have something called as an ISC Square peace of mind offer. So people who are specifically preparing for the ISSAP exam, they can actually take leverage of this peace of mind offer. So where you can, what you can basically do is, you can, purchase this peace of mind protection, register and sit for your exam. In case if you are not able to clear the exam at the first attempt, you can definitely uh, sit the second time without paying any additional costs. However, it's like both the attempts has to be completed within 180 days once you purchase this offer. So I would recommend people, once you purchase this offer, you have to really be aligned with the training and with the materials. So unless and until you have that kind of commitment where you are committed that you want to clear the examination within 180 days, do not go and purchase this offer. So a multinational firm uses 10 SaaS apps with siloed identity stores. The CIO wants to have a central visibility, policy enforcement, and lifecycle control for all identities. Which architecture with control placement resolves the identity sprawl securely? Keep identities separate per SaaS provider. Deploy an identity broker with SCIM provisioning, multi-factor and policy engine for cross-app governance. Use browser plugins for password management and only rely on SSO from one app to the another. So here the question is talking about resolving the identity sprawl. So the answer to this question is B for beta. Deploying an identity broker with SCIM provisioning, multi-factor access, and policy engine for cross-app governance. Another question. Your manufacturing division has a legacy SCADA systems with no modern encryption or patch support. These systems cannot be upgraded but must stay online. What architectural ensures risk containment while maintaining availability? Connect directly to the internet for vendor updates. But when we talk about SCADA, we don't directly connect any kind of SCADA systems to the internet, right? So definitely A is gone. Okay. Place legacy systems in an isolated VLAN, enforce firewall proxies, and monitor with inline IDS. Yes, we can park this option. Patch the OS using cloud agents, and finally move SCADA systems to the cloud VMs. So we cannot move the SCADA systems to the cloud VMs, because once you move to the cloud, you are going to incorporate more threat risks and vulnerabilities. So the best answer in this is B for beta. Again, placing legacy systems in an isolated VLAN, enforce firewall proxies, and monitor with the inline IDS.